Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefühl and welcome to Athens in Greece. We've come here to take a look at the latest revision on the Mazda 2. What's changed? Is it enough to justify looking at a new one? Let's take a closer look and find out. Well, the Mazda 2 has been out on the market for quite some time now, and its critics would say that it is a little overdue of revising. Well, Mazda have a lot of other cars they're working on immediately, so this is more of a facelift than a complete rethink. That's going to take a while to come to market. But a lot of people would also say if it isn't broken, it's not worth fixing. And the Mazda 2 has proved to be very popular. So what's worth tightening up? Well, there are a few visual changes going on here, but the real story is the inclusion of the new mild hybrid power platform. So although the engines that are on offer for this car remain the same, the way that power is delivered to the system has changed. We're obviously going to get the chance to give it a drive and find out what difference that's made. But on top of that, we have some technical revisions, some revisions to the way in which the infotainment system works and the technology that's available to you, and a little bit of tweaking in the drive and handling of the car. But come on, we also need to talk about how the aesthetic has changed. Well, if there's one place I would start with any member of the Mazda lineup, it's saying what a good job I think they've done of producing consistency throughout the line. It's a really tricky thing in the modern era to produce car design that's unique and distinctive but doesn't end up alienating half of your customer base. And Mazda have done a really great job with managing to create uniformity throughout the brand without making it look boring and, dare I say, without irritating their customers. Now, there's nothing wrong to be said with freshening things up wherever they can be now and then, and in the case of this car, that's just about making it look that little bit more sporty, that little bit more dynamic. The designers tell us that what they wanted to achieve here was lowering the visual sense of gravity. So you can see in this slight redesign of the bumper here how your eye is drawn down towards the lower third. And that's to emphasize the sportiness of the design, but it isn't just the aesthetic. The way that the technology is implemented has also been addressed as well. So there are now more options to be had within the lighting, amongst which you can have a new, improved and enhanced matrix LED. Well, that's an exciting technology. It works really, really well, but it does come at a price. So whether or not you think that's ready for prime time, I would be keen to find out about. Meanwhile, let's take a look along the side and see if anything's changed there. So here we are at the side profile, and before we get into talking about that, it's important first to have a word about the different product lines that you get with the Mazda 2. So at entrance you have Prime line, then Center line, then Exclusive line, and then Sports line. Why does that matter? Well, depending on which line you go for, very much dictates the equipment that's available at any given point. That's significant because when you decide you want to start configuring your particular model, you'll have to decide which things are important to you, which will end up dictating whereabouts you come on that scale. Now, this is a sports line, but to give you an example of what I'm talking about, if you go with a Prime line model, you're going to get 15-inch steel wheels. Go one up to the Center line, you get 15-inch alloys. One up to the Exclusive line, 15-inch alloys. And if you go with a sports line, the top line, you get these 16-inch alloy wheels. This is a perfect example of where you can be caught out when you're buying. This lovely color, which is a red, is available as an extra and it will set you back €950. Ouch! But that is a common issue with cheaper cars. Everything is about delivering a product to market at the lowest possible price point. So if you want anything that doesn't come as standard, you're usually going to end up paying. So important to work out what's important to you before you hit that order button. 4.7 meters or 160 inches in length. There's not a huge amount that's changed here to the aesthetic, but don't let that fool you. There have been some significant changes here, and largely they're down to the effect that everything has on noise reduction. Mazda are claiming a 35% reduction in overall noise in the car. How have they achieved that? Well, part of that's thanks to the brand new wheels, or tyres I should say, that have been designed for the revised edition, but also there's now thicker lining on the roof, and some of these gaps in the door panels have been reduced significantly. Now, it might not sound like that makes a big difference, but it does when you put it all together. Also new for this model, there are now brand new mudguards integrated into the wheel arch that again help reduce that noise. Does it all add up to making a big difference to the drive? Well, we're going to find out in just a little bit. Now we come round to the rear. Not a huge amount has changed here, but just a little bit of sharpening up here and there. As you can see, these light clusters are just a little bit more angular in their approach, and the overall finish just looks a little bit more stylish. But overall, I don't really think that there was a lot going wrong with the Mazda 2 in terms of its design. There's a lot to like here already. The changes just refreshen it and just make it that much more stylish and up to date. Let's take a look under the bonnet and see what's changed here. So you are going to be going for one of two engines. The weaker one is 75 horsepower, producing 135 newton meters of torque, and what you're looking at here is a 90 horsepower engine. Both are petrol, and this one produces 148 newton meters of torque. Now, if you want those paired with a 6-speed manual gearbox, you're going to be getting them as mild hybrid. That is a belt-driven system. It does not have a battery, so its main purpose is only designed to improve the efficiency of the vehicle. The reason that's important is that these two available engines are known from the previous Mazda 2, but they were not previously available as mild hybrid. Now, if you want an automatic, you can get this car as an automatic, but it will not be a mild hybrid. Not all engines are available at all different equipment trim lines. So your important decision is actually a lot simpler than that sounds. Do you want the larger of the two engines? And do you really have to have an automatic gearbox, or will you be okay with a manual? That dictates what you should be looking at. For my taste, I'm going to say, you know what, let's give the mild hybrid a try. And if the Mazda gearbox remains as good as it has been by tradition, then I think there's going to be a lot to enjoy about the drive. Here's the key to the Mazda 2, a nice small discreet affair that's going to fit nicely in your pocket and not take up too much room. As you can see on our model, we have keyless entry, so a nice discreet button for locking and unlocking of the door. Good satisfyingly solid sound on that door, which I think is always nice to find, especially on smaller cars, so that's going to make you feel pretty happy about the build quality. And that feeling of being happy with build quality continues once you actually get inside. I really like the mixed use of materials here in the door. That theme has continued right throughout the car, but it really suggests that you're getting a little bit more for your money than you might expect. In particular, I like the use of this really textured fabric. It makes the car feel a little bit more rugged than it otherwise might, and leads us on very nicely to this newly designed seat. Now I'm going to move round the side of Thomas so my shadow isn't falling on it and you can get a good look, whilst I should say putting my hand in the small of Thomas's back so he doesn't end up in the ocean. Now as you have a look around the interior, I think that feeling of quality is continued throughout. Again, there's a lot of nice design happening here, but nothing too dramatic, nothing too much. Well, I think we've come to the time to have a seat in this car and find out exactly what kind of comfort we can expect. Well, I am 5 feet 10 or 178 centimeters, but I do have very short legs and a very long torso. So if you're wondering what you can compare at, in terms of head height, I represent about the same as a 6'1" tall person. So plenty of headspace here, as you can see. The seat is adjusted very far forwards for my short legs, but I've got plenty of room and comfort. Immediately, I like the way this seat feels in terms of design. It puts me in a very nice driving position indeed. I feel completely in control of the cockpit experience. And while we're talking about the cockpit experience, well, because we have the Sportline here, and that has one of the available, or both actually, but the particular driver assistance package that delivers this, and that is a head-up display. If I turn this car on, then that should pop up for us. There we are. And you can see. Now, I'm not the world's biggest fan of head-up displays when they're integrated into the dashboard in the way that this one is. Whether or not you like these or they work for you is largely going to depend on the height of your torso, but we'll have to wait until we get to driving the car to find out how well this one performs. I really like what Mazda have done with the driver display here. For my taste, there's just the right mix of digital with analog. At a lower price point, obviously you're not going to yet get full digital displays, but you still expect to see some variety of information. And here we can cycle between what's available for us to look at using these controls on the steering wheel. While we're on the subject of the steering wheel, still you're getting leather wrapping, which I think it's time that we could have more sustainable materials being used to wrap steering wheels with. It's funny to me that the one firm I always think of as doing that, a Porsche, I mean, after all, you know, they can't be the first guys to come up with the idea of putting Alcantara on a steering wheel. Answer below if you know who actually was. But it just feels a bit more modern and inventive than this does. It still feels good, but I think it might be time to look at different alternatives. That said, this is a really nicely designed steering wheel experience. Buttons are all well laid out, easily accessible, and it feels good and solid in your hand. While we are on the subject of good and solid, that would be an excellent opportunity for Thomas to pop round the other side of the car. All cars are going to be a compromise between cost and quality, and I would far rather that manufacturers put that decision at a level at which the drive is where all of the money is being spent. That said, there are certain things that ideally you wouldn't like to see, and there are just a couple of features in this car. You can see how the shelf is easily movable, and if we go slightly lower down, you can see that the center console actually has a fair amount of flex in. I think may have been possible to bring a bit more rigidity to both of these components without significantly changing the structure or the price. But you know what, it is a cheaper car. There are always going to be compromises, so I'm showing you this not by way of complaint, only because at Autogefühl we hope to give you as full of a picture of the car as possible, so when you go and see them in the showroom, you aren't in any way caught out by something that's a surprise. So bear that in mind, but I do think it's well worth showing you just a couple of things that aren't necessarily quite as perfect as we might like them. Talking about things that aren't quite as nice as you might like them, we have to mention this infotainment system screen. Now again, please bear in mind this is relevant to the price point of the car. So of course, you can't expect to pay a small amount of money and have the world's best system. It's very difficult to really fairly criticize because integrating any technology into a car is unbelievably expensive and challenging. That said, I am starting to notice on some cars that processors are getting faster and more efficient, and I'm really enjoying that. Still on cheaper models, you tend to find this an awful lot, and that is processors that aren't quite up to the job they're being asked to perform, and displays that just aren't as crisp as you might like them. So again, where do we want to experience compromise? I'm more than happy to live with a display that's not quite what I would like it to be if the drive is excellent. Much happier with that than an amazing looking display, and compromises have been made in terms of how the car actually performs. So please do bear that in mind. It all depends how important this is to you. Obviously, there are lots of different choices to be made. For me, with a system like this, really, I get used to knowing what I need to know and then just ignore this completely, because it works fine, but it's just not quite what we've all come to expect from our interaction with technology. So that's all the negative done with in terms of the interior. The rest of it is all very positive indeed. In making those difficult decisions about where to spend the money, I think Mazda have done a really nice job on spending time and money everywhere that the driver is physically interacting with. Look at the quality of this air outlet. It's really nicely delivered and a pleasure to grab hold of. And most importantly, when you're driving and paying attention to that, you can get the air to go exactly where you need to without spending any time thinking about it. Not only that, it feels nice, but it looks good too. And that sense of quality and design is continued down here in the dash, where you can see this nice discreet stitching that really adds a feeling of quality. And look further down, still fantastic, easy to use analog dials. Brilliant. With this knurling on the outer rim, really easy and pleasurable to grab hold of while you're driving. A really nice quality feeling of the clicking motion around here, and you can just get to what you need to really quickly, efficiently and easy without looking at it, thinking about it, or spending any time on it at all. And it works really well in conjunction with this. Now I know, a gear stick. You may well be thinking, how much more is there to say about these things? But even in cheaper cars, the way that feels in your hand is really important. And for me, what I particularly like is the way that I can move between this and controlling the heating and cooling in one easy fluid motion, where I can just immediately contact with what I want to do. It feels good, it looks good, and it behaves really well. So thumbs up, Mazda. I think that's a really nice piece of ergonomic design. So as we come slightly further down, I don't know if Thomas can see just behind the gear stick. Can you see back there, Thomas?
I see a little bit. I will show you later.
Ah, perfect. We have a really nice ledge here for a mobile phone. That's not inductive charging at the moment, but we do have two USB ports just here which act as charging points. There's still a 12-volt charge point for anything else, and if you want to put an SD card into your system, there's a slot for one just down here. Coming further back, again, I really like the feeling that money hasn't been wasted on features you just don't want in a cheaper car. And this control system is for the infotainment. It's important because although you can control elements of the infotainment through the driver's steering wheel, you're also going to need something extra to access the menus. And when you're driving, you cannot do that through touch. You have to use these buttons. So I think this jog wheel has the same feeling of quality and usability that we experienced earlier with the heating and cooling. It's really very instinctive, very neat, very easily laid out and easy to access. Slightly further back, no fuss at all, just two regular size cup holders. Can you actually fit anything in the glove box? Well, yes, a surprisingly large amount. Look at this, 2 bottles of water, plenty of space for the user's manual. And you know what? I think you could fit a fair bit extra in there as well. I know it's a small car, but can you actually fit real-size human people in the back of it? Well, let's find out. Actually, Thomas pointed out, Mazda have done a really good job of designing this car to make access to the rear really easy for rear seat passengers. And that's important, especially if you have elderly people to fit back here. Once you get back here, well, you actually have a fair amount of space for a smaller car. Now, this seat in front is set for Thomas. If you have a look next, you can see the seat that's set for me. So realistically, he has far more room than he needs in the front. I have a very little amount of room because I have short legs. So if you look halfway between the two, you have a realistic idea on space. But as you can see, even allowing for the very backwards position of this front seat, I still have sufficient space to find a comfortable area to sit. As far as headroom goes, well, I don't have the most, but you know what? I actually have enough, and I think I could do a pretty decent length journey back here in a reasonable amount of comfort. There's a 60-40 split on the seats, which means I can access the boot from back here without needing to actually get out of the car, and that could work out to be handy for more than a couple of different things. And you have 2 sets of ISOFIX points, which means you can obviously fit those child seats into the rear. We don't have any charge points back here for electronics, which might have been a nice inclusion, but the fit and quality feels exactly the same as it does in the front, and I actually feel pretty comfortable. So in small car terms, I'm actually pretty happy. Let's take a quick look in the boot to see what's happening there. Well, no big changes here. You're looking at 280 litres of load space. There's a 60-40 split on the rear seats. So if you fold those down, you're going to be looking at 950 litres of room. And I'll just flip one of those so you can see. Nice job here with making this pretty flat in terms of its presentation, so you can fit quite a lot of good stuff back here. Only slight complaint would be, it might have been nice to have had a higher level ledge here that would drop to give us a more even load height. As you can see, that is a pretty spectacular drop down to the lower area there, but at least that does maximize the amount of room that's available, and in small car terms, I think that should be more than enough. Ready to put the Mazda 2 through its paces and find out exactly what has changed in this car. Well, I think the first thing that's well worth mentioning is that a lot of the time with facelifted vehicles, you really don't get a huge amount of change with the design. So you have to forgive Mazda to a certain extent for not blowing the doors off in terms of redesign. But there has been a little bit of sharpening involving the drive taking place.
After 800 meters.
Thank you for your help. And in large part, that includes the following. We now have a crisper, more responsive steering. They've made a few changes there. The dampening is a little bit different. They've changed some key components. And the tyres have also been completely redesigned. And that might sound like a small thing, but it does have a massive amount of impact on the drive, both in terms of how it feels, but also, of course, with that all-important fuel efficiency. Now, there are 2 engines available for this car, and we have the more powerful one. That's the petrol. If you go with the petrol, you can have it in 2 flavors, either automatic or manual. If you want to go with the mild hybrid, and that's the only new thing happening in the... Thank you, Thomas.
You're welcome.
That's the only new thing happening in the engine department. Then you're going to find that you have a choice between the 2, but they are both going to come with a 6-speed manual gearbox. So we have the more powerful of the petrol engines that produces 90 horsepower and up to 148 Newton meters of torque. So how does all of that come together? Well, we'll get into that in a little bit, but before we do, let's talk about the driving position. Well, you know, as we get to travel around and try various different cars, one of the most interesting things that you look for are the trends in terms of what the manufacturers tell you about how the car design is changing and what different components are important at various different times. As a person with a slightly odd, dare I say it, body geometry, I'm more than happy to hear more and more manufacturers talking about the importance of ergonomic design when they are approaching their cars. So the Mazda 2 has new seats, and according to them, they've put an amazing amount of time and effort into making sure they work for different body geometries. Now, that's not going to come as a major news flash. Every single manufacturer makes very similar claims when it comes to its cars, but what I am excited about is to see how much more successful those designs are working out. Perfect example I can think of would be from last year when we drove the Peugeot 208. And I think every journalist I spoke to was blown away by how good that seat design was. I'm always the most interested to see seat designs in smaller cars because obviously the design budgets are smaller. And not only that, but they also have a lot less soaking up those bumps and rolls that you get while you're driving along. So the seat design for me in a smaller vehicle is critical. Good news then. I think Mazda have done a really nice job with this. Now, obviously, that's very dependent on your personal body geometry, but I'm very pleased at the balance they've struck here between support, which is key because you want that sporty fun feel in a smaller car, but also comfort. Now, if you have any concern about wanting to feel comfortable while you're driving the car, it's always important to try it before you make a commitment to buying it. It's shocking quite what a difference the seat can make to your experience as a driver, but so far I'm really liking this. Road position is great, position within the car is good. I have a really nice sense of space around me. I'm not held maybe quite as much as I would personally like to be, but don't forget, this is not the biggest engine in the world, so you're really not likely to be ripping around country roads in it, wondering why you're swinging around. You get enough hold for this style and profile of vehicle. All-around visibility is actually good. The positioning of the B-pillar here is excellent. So I have plenty of good all-around glass to get a good sense of everything that's going on. Steering wheel, well, you'd expect it from Mazda. It's nicely put together, and the way that the components work in concert is excellent. Now, onto the drive. Well, for me, the most important things that a small car has to deliver when it comes to the drive are fun, a little bit of sportiness. I should feel really agile and be able to pop in and out as I like. And it should put a smile on my face because, you know, it's a small car. Well, I'm not really going to amaze anyone when I tell you that the Mazda 2 has a really great drive. That said, that's second gear. That's third gear. You see where I'm going to with this. Now, this is the more powerful engine, but please bear in mind this is designed first and foremost as a city car. Because of that, the most important thing is efficiency, not performance. So of course the engine is not going to deliver you stacks of excitement. But you know what? It sounds very pleasant, and what goes an awfully long way to make up for any shortfall that you're experiencing there is the quality of the way the components work with each other. The steering on this car is really pleasing. It has a lot more weight to it than you would expect from such a small, light vehicle. I think they have the balance just right between making it feel small, agile and nippy, but giving you a weight that doesn't make you feel like you're driving something that weighs absolutely nothing at all. So hats off to Mazda. I think it's a really nice job. Now, not only that, but the gearbox is excellent. Mazda have been making good, reliable gearboxes for some time now. What has specifically changed with this generation of the Mazda 2 is because of the introduction of the mild hybrid system, you now have a little bit of assistance when you are changing up with the gears. That makes that gear change even smoother, even more reliable, and just an absolute pleasure to use. If anything, if it wasn't quite this good, I wouldn't have noticed the lack of power so much. But it's so pleasing to change gears in this car. You actually do notice that you think, oh, the steering's great, the handling's good, the gear change is excellent, come on, let's go. And of course, you don't have the power there to back it up. Well, you can't have everything. And I think when you take all of these things together, what you do get by way of experience is excellent. So, anything that I'm not such a fan of? Well, I might be being a little bit picky here. In fact, I am being a little bit picky here. But the only things that I don't enjoy immediately driving this car, one, this head-up display. If you're not used to Mazda and you're not used to buying Mazda, what you maybe won't know, because it's not the standard way a lot of the European manufacturers work, is that you don't have the opportunity to buy any extra at any level. you can't completely style your car as it suits you. You have to go along with what's available at what price point with what package. So that takes a little bit to adjust to. This car is the Sport line. So if you want the driver assistance system package 1, which incorporates the head-up display, you have to have the Sport line to get it. And that means that if you want the other things in the package, whether you like it or not, you're going to be ending up with one of these parked on front of your dashboard. Now, the driver assistance package number 1 with the Sport line only rocks in at around about €800. So please bear in mind, when I'm being critical of this system, it does represent a very good value for money, but, and it's an important but, there's a cost for that isn't just reflected within the price. Now, as I've already said, I have a slightly strange body geometry, and that means that when I'm interacting with head-up displays, it matters more to me than maybe most other people that they're really well designed for different sized people. I have a very long torso, so you can compare my height at around about a 6 foot or 6'1" person. The problem with that is that this screen right here cannot be adjusted. The text within the screen can be adjusted like this, and that takes care of most people's requirements. But if you have a long torso or you're taller, what you'll find is that in order to make that text visible, instead of appearing where you would like it to be, which is on the road in front of you, you have to adjust it down so it appears right on top of your bonnet. And that just isn't a very nice experience. When you want to look at it, it really drags your focus away from the road, and it's just not that comfortable to interact with. So it's not really a big deal. But if head-up display is something that's important to you, please make sure that you check that out prior to making a purchase. Which brings me to point number 2, and that has to be this guy here. Well, positives. I really like the intuitive design that's now going into this system. It is a touch display, but that touch is deactivated while you're driving the car. I like that as a safety feature. You have to either use the driver's control on the steering wheel, or you can use the controls down here underneath your gear stick. Well, you're always going to get compromises at the cheaper end of the market. In this car, what that means is that you don't have the processing power that some of the services on this car really ideally would like. So although it does an awful lot, it doesn't do any of it terribly quickly, and the screen, clearly again at price point, is not as nice looking or as responsive as you might like. Now, you have to be realistic about what it is you look for at a car when you're buying a smaller, lower end one. And I think in terms of how this sits with its competitors, it's only at the lower end. I wouldn't say that it's disastrous by comparison, but it is noticeable. So if that's going to bother you, well, you might just want to think about that first. Also, they've done such a good job, and again, I think this is a fair comment to make with the Mazda 2, that it's only that some of the elements are so good that you notice in the contrast when other elements aren't that great. And as we show you when we take a look at the interior, you have seen how great this dashboard is finished. So it's only noticeably out of place because it's just not to the same standard, either from a design term or from a usability standpoint. So that's the infotainment. What about use of the car? Well, on a day-to-day usage basis, this car is going to cause you no problems at all. Driving it around small country lanes, as long as they're not particularly fast, is just purely a pleasure. This steering experience is excellent. The gearbox is excellent. The braking is responsive and precise. What's not so good? Well, clearly that's the acceleration. But you can't have everything. As much as I like this gearbox, it's a 6-speed. And I can tell you that you are not going to use that 6th gear unless you have somewhere you can drive realistically at least 110, 120. Because there simply is no need for it. You could use this car for its entire lifetime and never even put it in 6th gear. If you do, it's only any use for coasting. You certainly can't get any acceleration out of it at all if there's any hint of an incline on the road. So like all cars, you need to drive it a little bit to get used to where its particular foibles are. But that's a minor niggle. I want the efficiency from a vehicle like this, and I want the pleasure and fun to use around town. Nipping in, nipping out, ease of parking, great all-round visibility, good level of comfort, and I have all of those things in more than ample supply. Thomas, how's it feeling as a passenger?
It feels very comfortable because the noise insulation inside, I think it is pretty nice. So I don't feel like a small car, probably a little bit upper class.
That's nice. And I think it's well worth pointing out that with the introduction of the mild hybrid system, and that is not necessarily a straightforward proposition if you're used to the concept, this mild hybrid does not feature a battery. Instead, it uses an assist in order to gain help when it's starting from a start-stop perspective and with the gear changes, and that results in a higher degree of efficiency for the engine. So you're always going to be slightly concerned about the impact that will have on the drive of the car. And I have to tell you, it's very well delivered. At the moment, we're reporting an efficiency of 5.1 litres for every 100 kilometres driven, and that's consistent with our expectation of what we would want from the vehicle. It's not the most efficient system in the world, but the important thing is to consider the impact at price point. Now, obviously, anytime you have an additional layer of technology in a vehicle, that is an additional thing that you might end up needing to pay to fix if it breaks or has an issue. But I think that this is well-known and well-used technology, so you're not actually doing anything that dramatically complicated. The not having the battery present certainly massively reduces that price point and means they can still bring the Mazda 2 to you at a reasonably affordable point whilst delivering extra efficiency. So if you're not familiar with the tech and you're worried about it, or bluntly you just don't know quite what it means, it's essentially just an extra belt within your engine that is going to produce power on demand for when you need it. So it's best described as a belt-driven system. The most important thing to know about that is that if it's well executed, you should be able to drive the car without noticing any difference to the drive at all, and you can. And the only time you should notice the difference really is when you're paying to fill it up at the gas pump. All right, so it's really an unfair test, but I think it's important to be aware of what you're buying. So we are going to show you the acceleration in this car now, just to give you a full sense of exactly what it does. Please remember, 90 horsepower, not designed to go too quickly. So, plenty enough pull-off speed to deal with traffic lights. Lovely gear change to second, up to around about 5,000 revs. Now we're at third, and we're going at 90 kilometers per hour. So that's about as fast as I want to take it for this road, but I think that gives you a pretty decent feel. For my taste, and bearing in mind this is the more powerful of the two engines that are available, I would say if you're either not prone to wanting fast, sporty driving, or you live in town, and that's key, this car is going to be perfect for you. If you really want to tear it up once you get round the back roads, I think you're going to need to be looking somewhere a little bit different. But then in fairness, you're also going to find yourself paying a little bit more. As the sun sets here in Athens, it's time to draw in our conclusions about the new Mazda 2. Well, newish Mazda 2. Let's talk first of all about pricing. The base entrance level price on this car is €14,190. If you want the sports line, and that's this car, the entrance price is €19,690, but as we have it equipped here today, €23,190. So I think reasonably, even if you really well equip a Mazda 2, it still comes in at a very affordable price point. And bearing in mind, a whole thousand of that was just on the color that this car is painted. But as the sun is showing us really rather nicely, that might just about be worth the money. Now, I think what's really important with the Mazda 2 is making sure that you get the right equipment line to suit all of your needs. There are lots of different options, but they're all only available with certain spec and considerations. Given the 3 engines that you have, or the 2 engines with the mild hybrid and the 1 engine without with the automatic gearbox, my pick would absolutely be the more powerful of the 2 petrols with the mild hybrid. I think the manual gearbox is great, so I certainly wouldn't want to spend the extra just on getting the automatic and losing the efficiency of that mild hybrid system. So, how does the mild hybrid actually add up? I think you actually have to be very impressed with what Mazda have achieved here. The car's drive has only been improved from its predecessor whilst improving the efficiency of the vehicle significantly. So, increase in performance and no decrease in the driving functionality of the car. I'm all about that. I think that's really, really good. Should you wait if you want one of these to see what the next generation has to offer? Well, Mazda are being a little bit sticky on quite how long that's going to take and how far in their lineup priorities that sits. So with this redesign, what they really wanted to do was to add enough residual value to keep customers happy while they're waiting somewhat indefinitely. What I can tell you is that the sharpening and improvements that have been made on this car absolutely justify you sticking with this for now. I don't think it's necessary to wait, and I think this approach to mild hybrid technology that keeps the price point where it needs to be is really exciting. Talking of really exciting, the drive of this car is great. As a city runabout, it's got more than enough pep and pickup. The handling is really nice. The weighting of the steering is excellent. Yeah, okay, it's missing the speed. But the only reason you will notice that is because everything else about the drive is so pleasing. Are there other small cars on the market currently that have an even better drive? Well, I mean, that comes down to engine size as well. If I think about the cars that really excite me to drive, they all have larger engines, therefore less efficiency and obviously higher tax. So when you put all of those things together, and you look at the design and you can still appreciate the freshness in it and the subtle changes that have all added up to a really great offering, I think at price point, this car offers an awful lot of satisfying bang for your buck. But that's my take. Tell me what you think. If you have any comments or questions, please pop them below. Please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope we'll see you all soon.